Welcome to 2 Minute Tech Tuesdays, your weekly dose of Varnish tech brought to you in 2 minutes or less. I'm Thijs, tech evangelist at Varnish Software, and in this week's episode, we'll be looking at parallel ESI. ESI is short for Edge Site Includes, and in the open source version, ESI is processed serially, whereas in the enterprise version, ESI processing happens in parallel. But before we can explain all that, we need to explain what ESI actually means. So we'll do this by putting 2 minutes on the timer. Let's get started. Imagine the following website composition with a header, a footer, a navigation, and a main page. This is very common, but what if the header contains user information that is highly personalized? Well, that would mean the entire page would become uncacheable, and that is not acceptable. But luckily, over the years, people have found ways to circumvent these limitations by loading uncacheable content through a separate HTTP request while maintaining the cacheability of the rest of the page. There's many technologies to do that, but today we'll be focusing on Edge Site Includes, or ESI Includes, as we tend to call them. ESI Includes are placeholder tags that are emitted by the origin application and that are interpreted and parsed by Varnish or similar technology that operates on the edge. The source attribute refers to an HTTP endpoint that is loaded as an HTTP subrequest. Varnish will cache the responses of each subrequest separately and stitch them back together as a composition of content blocks. Each block has its own state and its own TTL. ESI parsing can be triggered by enabling the bresp.do_ESI variable in your VCL code. And in terms of implementation, it could be triggered when a specific URL is matched, when the content type is assumed to be text-based content, or more intricately, by waiting a surrogate control header containing ESI that might be sent by the origin application. This means the header would be loaded through an ESI subrequest, but it's also possible that the navigation and the footer are also loaded through ESI subrequests. And that brings us to the subject of parallel or serial ESI processing. In Varnish Cache, the open source project, each ESI subrequest is handled sequentially, which means head-of-line blocking can take place. Assuming that every ESI subrequest takes 1 second, the total loading time would be over 3 seconds. Whereas in Varnish Enterprise, ESI subrequests are handled in parallel. Even though each subrequest might take the same amount of time, the total loading time would amount to a little over a second. And that explains ESI and more specifically parallel ESI. Please remember that this is a native Varnish Enterprise feature that doesn't need to be installed, configured, or enabled. That was also 2 Minute Tech Tuesdays for this week. I'll be back next week with yet another video explained to you in 2 minutes or less.